My sister sent out lavish wedding invitations to half the city, but deliberately excluded me. My mother told me not to make a scene because my presence would ruin the aesthetic. I just smiled, turned around, and walked away. On the day of the wedding, I stayed home sipping wine in my penthouse until my phone exploded with notifications. Videos were going viral of the wealthy groom aggressively grabbing my sister by the hair while guests screamed in terror. When my mother called me sobbing, begging for my crisis management firm to save them, I simply looked at my screen and whispered my final answer. I shocked them all. My name is Vanessa, 33 years old, and the CEO of a top crisis public relations firm. I built my empire from the ground up after my family discarded me, but I never expected their toxic obsession with image to implode so spectacularly on national television. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you ever had to stand up to toxic family members who thought they could walk all over you. It was a crisp Tuesday afternoon when I drove my car up the winding driveway of my parents' suburban estate. I did not want to be there. The sprawling brick house with its perfectly manicured hedges and imposing columns had never felt like a home to me. It felt like a stage where we were all forced to play our assigned parts. But I had left my grandfather's vintage pocket watch in my old childhood bedroom during a brief obligatory holiday visit last month, and I wanted it back. The watch was the only thing of value I actually cared about in that house. I used my spare key to unlock the heavy oak front door. The house was quiet, filled with the scent of expensive vanilla candles and lemon furniture polish. My heels clicked softly against the pristine marble foyer as I walked toward the main staircase. But as I passed the formal dining room, something caught my eye. The massive mahogany table, usually kept bare and polished to a mirror, shine was covered in a sea of thick cream-colored envelopes. Intricate gold foil lettering sparkled under the light of the crystal chandelier. I paused, stepping into the room. The air felt heavy. I walked up to the edge of the table and looked down at the towering stacks of mail. They were wedding invitations for my younger sister, Chloe. I knew she was getting married to Marcus, a wealthy businessman she had been parading around for months. I knew the wedding was fast approaching. I had simply assumed my invitation was lost in the mail or still being processed. I reached out and picked up the top envelope from the stack on the left. The thick cardstock felt expensive between my fingers. The wax seal on the back bore a custom crest intertwining their initials. I opened a spare, unsealed envelope sitting near the edge. The card inside announced the union of Chloe and Marcus at the city's most exclusive country club, followed by a black tie reception. The level of detail was staggering. They had spared absolutely no expense for this performance. Elegant calligraphy spelled out the name of my mother's tennis instructor on the first envelope. I set it down and picked up another. This one was addressed to a distant cousin in Ohio who had not spoken to our family in a decade. I picked up a third. It was addressed to the owner of the local boutique where Chloe bought her shoes. My hands moved faster now, sliding across the slick surface of the mahogany table, flipping through the pristine envelopes one by one. I saw names of business associates my father barely tolerated, men he called vultures behind closed doors. I saw names of neighbors my mother actively complained about at every Sunday brunch. I saw the name of the florist, the caterer, and even the family accountant who only communicated with them via email. There were hundreds of these gold-foiled envelopes, carefully organized by zip code, ready to be mailed out to half the state. My eyes scanned every single pile. I checked the stack on the far right. I checked the overflow pile near the silver centerpiece. I checked the stray envelopes resting on the dining room chairs. My name was nowhere to be found. There was no envelope for Vanessa. There was no plus one. There was absolutely nothing. The deliberate nature of it hit me like a physical blow to the chest. They had invited everyone from the mailman to estranged relatives, but they had methodically and intentionally excluded me, the eldest daughter of the family. I did not cry. I did not feel a sudden urge to scream or throw the expensive crystal vases against the wall. I did not let a single tear form. My daily business was managing global catastrophes, handling massive corporate meltdowns, and keeping my absolute composure when everything around me was burning to the ground. I felt a cold, sharp focus wash over my entire body. I stood perfectly still, tightly clutching a handful of the heavy envelopes in my right hand. The oppressive quiet of the house was suddenly broken by the sharp, rhythmic sound of footsteps approaching from the kitchen hallway. The distinctive clicking of sensible designer heels grew steadily louder. I dropped the handful of envelopes onto the table. They landed with a heavy, sliding thud against the polished wood surface. My mother Beatrice walked through the dining room archway holding a silver clipboard and a gold pen. She took 2 steps into the room and froze completely when she saw me standing there. The color drained from her meticulously made-up face as our eyes met across the room. She knew exactly what I had just discovered, and there was absolutely no possible escape. Beatrice simply did not apologize. She did not offer a frantic excuse or drop her silver clipboard in shock. The panic that flashed across her face vanished instantly, replaced by the icy composure she had worn my entire life. She walked past me, ignoring the scattered envelopes on the mahogany table, and moved toward the crystal beverage cart in the corner. She poured a glass of sparkling water, the ice clinking sharply in the silence. She took a slow sip before turning to face me. "I was going to tell you," she said, her voice devoid of genuine remorse. She sighed, acting as if my presence was an exhausting inconvenience. Things moved incredibly fast with the wedding preparations, and we had to make difficult decisions regarding the guest list. Difficult decisions, I repeated, keeping my tone perfectly flat. You invited the local florist and a cousin you have not spoken to in 10 years, but excluding your eldest daughter was a difficult decision. Beatrice set her crystal glass down. Do not start with the dramatic victim routine, Vanessa. You know exactly how you are. Marcus comes from a prominent family. They are elite African American socialites who hold significant influence and power. They are traditional, elegant, and focused on presenting a flawless public image. She gestured vaguely in my direction, her eyes scanning me with naked disapproval. You always wear those severe masculine suits. Your attitude is constantly cynical, and you dissect every social interaction like you are conducting a hostile corporate takeover. His guests will judge us. I cannot have you sitting at a prominent family table radiating negative energy and making his parents uncomfortable. The sheer audacity of her reasoning hung in the air. She was explicitly telling me my personality, career-driven demeanor, and professional wardrobe were too embarrassing to be seen by his wealthy parents. She was prioritizing the hypothetical judgment of strangers over the presence of her own flesh and blood. Before I could formulate a response that would adequately convey my disgust, the heavy thud of footsteps sounded from the grand staircase. Chloe walked into the dining room, her eyes glued to the screen of her latest smartphone. She wore designer loungewear, her blonde hair perfectly styled into waves that took 2 hours to achieve. She did not even look up until she was halfway across the room. When she finally lifted her gaze and saw me standing next to the table covered in wedding invitations, she simply rolled her eyes and let out an exaggerated theatrical groan. "Please do not make a scene, Vanessa," Chloe said, waving her phone at me as if swatting away a fly. "I have a dress fitting in an hour, and my stress levels are already completely maximized. I really do not have the emotional bandwidth to deal with one of your intense lectures today." I looked at my younger sister, the golden child who had never worked a hard day without our parents handing her a safety net. "A scene," I said calmly. "I am standing quietly in the dining room after discovering I am the only person in this entire city not invited to your wedding, and you think I am making a scene." Chloe scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest and shifting her weight to one hip. She looked at our mother for validation before turning her sharp, perfectly manicured glare back to me. "This is exactly why we did not want to tell you," she snapped. "You turn everything into a massive debate. This is my day. This is the most important day of my life, and it needs to be absolutely flawless. Marcus and his family are accustomed to a certain aesthetic, a specific kind of high society elegance. I do not need my bitter, single 33-year-old sister sitting in the corner ruining the aesthetic of my reception with her dark suits and corporate glare." Her words were designed to cut deep, utilizing every insecurity she assumed I still harbored. She thought calling me single and bitter would break my composure. She thought weaponizing my age would make me crumble and cry. She genuinely believed my lack of a husband made me entirely inferior to her, a woman about to marry into massive wealth she did not earn. So I ruined the aesthetic. I clarified, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. That is the official reason. Not the fact that I bought you your first car when Dad cut your allowance. Not the fact that I paid for your college tutors when you were failing your sophomore year. But the absolute fact that my dark suits clash with your floral arrangements. Chloe did not flinch. She stepped closer, her face twisting into an ugly, arrogant sneer that completely destroyed any illusion of the elegance she claimed to possess. "Do not try to hold the past over my head," she hissed. "You have always been jealous of me. You are jealous that I found a wealthy, powerful man who wants to take care of me while you spend 80 hours a week screaming at people in boardrooms. You are obsessed with your work because no man wants to deal with a woman who acts like a CEO in her own home." Marcus brings high-profile investors to this family. He brings massive status. You just bring horrible tension. So yes, you are not invited. Accept it, and leave quietly before you embarrass yourself further. Beatrice nodded in agreement, stepping up to stand shoulder to shoulder with Chloe. They presented a united toxic front. "We are simply asking you to be mature about this." "Vanessa," my mother added, her tone dripping with fake maternal concern. "We are protecting the family brand. Marcus represents a massive financial opportunity for your father's logistics company. We cannot risk offending his parents because you refuse to conform to basic societal expectations. Just be a good sister for once and stay out of the way." I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not fall to my knees and beg them to love me or to accept me into their fragile, hollow circle of high society pretenders. Years ago, their words might have shattered my confidence. A younger version of me might have spent the entire drive home wondering what was fundamentally wrong with my personality. But standing in that dining room looking at the two women who prioritized a superficial aesthetic over their own flesh and blood, I felt nothing but absolute crystalline clarity. They were not protecting a family brand. They were protecting a fragile illusion. I let a slow, deliberate smirk spread across my face. The tension in the room shifted instantly. Beatrice and Chloe had braced themselves for a meltdown. They had prepared for tears, for shouting, for the kind of emotional outburst they could easily label as hysterical to justify my exclusion. My calm amusement completely derailed their script. I reached inside the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. My fingers brushed against the crisp, heavy paper of the envelope I had brought with me. I pulled it out slowly, holding it up so the overhead chandelier light caught the pristine white surface. "Do not worry, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly level. "I would not dream of ruining your perfect facade." I held the envelope with two fingers. With deliberate precision, I used my thumb to slide the flap open just enough to expose the contents. Inside rested a certified cashier's check printed on thick bank paper. I tilted it slightly toward my mother. Beatrice possessed the uncanny ability to spot currency from across any room, a skill honed by decades of trying to maintain a lifestyle my father could barely afford. Her eyes locked onto the numbers printed on the check. I watched her pupils dilate. I watched her perfectly manicured hand twitch at her side. She saw the $50,000 amount clearly printed next to Chloe's name. It was the wedding gift I had planned to give them, a generous offering I had authorized just that morning to help them start their new life. I knew Marcus was allegedly wealthy, but I also knew my sister had a habit of burning through cash faster than anyone could print it. I had intended to give her a safety net. $50,000, I said softly, letting the amount hang in the quiet air of the dining room. "Just a small token from your bitter single sister to celebrate this massive financial opportunity you have secured." Chloe gasped, her eyes darting from my face to the envelope. The arrogant sneer vanished from her lips, replaced instantly by naked, desperate greed. She took a half step forward, her hand instinctively rising, as if she expected me to hand it over right then and there. Beatrice opened her mouth, her tone completely changing, the icy hostility melting into sudden syrupy sweetness. "Vanessa, darling," Beatrice stammered, taking a step toward me with her hands outstretched. "Let us not be hasty. You know weddings are incredibly stressful. Chloe is just overwhelmed with the preparations and the pressure from Marcus's family. We did not mean to sound so harsh. You are family. We can certainly find a place for you at the reception." I laughed. The sound was cold and genuine. It echoed off the high ceiling and the mahogany table covered in their golden invitations. "You do not get to invite my money after you uninvited me," I said, sliding the cashier's check smoothly back into the envelope. "And you definitely do not get to backtrack now, just because you realized your aesthetic choices come with a massive price tag." I tucked the envelope safely back into the inside pocket of my blazer. I smoothed the lapels of my dark suit, the exact masculine suit they claimed would embarrass them in front of their elite guests. I looked my mother directly in the eyes, watching the panic set in as she realized that $50,000 was walking right out of her dining room. I looked at my sister, whose face was rapidly turning a splotchy, furious shade of red. "Have the perfect day you deserve," I said. I turned on my heel and walked away. I did not look back. I did not wait for their inevitable protests. I heard Beatrice call my name, her voice shrill and desperate, echoing down the hallway. I heard Chloe yell something unintelligible, her tone frantic. Their voices faded into background noise as I crossed the marble foyer. The sound of my heels striking the floor was steady and rhythmic, a physical manifestation of my absolute control. I pushed open the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. The sunlight felt brilliant. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere of that house vanished the second the door clicked shut behind me. As I walked down the long, manicured walkway toward my car, I reached into my other pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened my contacts. I tapped on my mother's name. Block caller. I tapped on my sister's name. Block caller. I tapped on my father's name. Block caller. I did not hesitate. I did not pause to consider the implications. I systematically severed their access to my life before I even reached the driveway. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The quiet hum of the motor was the only sound. I placed my phone on the passenger seat, completely silent and devoid of their toxic demands. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the estate. Looking in the rearview mirror, I watched the imposing brick house shrink into the distance until it disappeared entirely from view. I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation wash over me. For the first time in my 33 years, the ties were cut. I was finally completely free. 3 weeks passed. The day of Chloe's supposedly flawless wedding finally arrived, bringing with it a torrential downpour across the city. While my family was likely panicking over ruined floral arrangements and muddy red carpets, I was experiencing a level of tranquility I had not felt in years. I sat in the expansive living room of my downtown luxury penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline, the city lights beginning to flicker to life against the darkening rain-swept sky. I was not pacing the floors. I was not crying over old photo albums. I was not wondering what they were doing at the country club. I was wearing a pair of emerald green silk pajamas that felt like cool water against my skin, my bare feet tucked beneath me on a plush velvet sofa. A fire crackled softly in the modern gas fireplace, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. I reached for the crystal glass resting on the marble coffee table beside me. I swirled the expensive Pinot Noir, watching the deep ruby liquid catch the firelight, and took a slow, appreciative sip. The rich, complex flavors grounded me perfectly in the present moment. I set the glass down and turned my attention back to the sleek silver laptop resting on my knees. I was reviewing the quarterly financial reports for my crisis public relations firm. The numbers staring back at me were nothing short of spectacular. We had just secured 3 new international accounts, boosting our annual revenue by another 40%. I scrolled through the data matrices, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. Every single digit represented a battle I had won entirely on my own. I built my agency from a tiny rented desk in a shared workspace into a multi-million-dollar powerhouse. I handled media disasters for politicians, rescued sinking corporate brands, and navigated scandals that would break most people. I was a master at controlling the narrative. The journey to this level of financial freedom had been brutal, demanding sacrifices that my sister could never possibly comprehend. Chloe had spent her 20s hopping between luxury resorts, maxing out credit cards our father willingly paid off, and curating an artificial online presence designed to attract wealthy suitors. She built her entire identity on the illusion of perfection, desperately seeking external validation through expensive handbags and highly edited photographs. Meanwhile, I was sleeping 4 hours a night, analyzing market trends and pitching contracts to corporate executives who initially dismissed me because of my age. I endured endless rejections, navigated toxic boardrooms, and slowly clawed my way to the top of a ruthless industry. Every ounce of my wealth was earned through strategic brilliance and relentless execution. Looking at the massive profit margins on my screen, I felt zero resentment toward my family. Their rejection was the greatest gift they could have ever given me. It removed the safety net and forced me to learn how to fly. My parents always believed that a woman's ultimate achievement was marrying into established wealth. They viewed my career as a temporary rebellion, a phase I would eventually outgrow once I found a man to validate my existence. They genuinely thought cutting me off at 18 would force me to crawl back, begging for their financial support and accepting whatever arranged marriage they deemed appropriate for their business interests. Instead, I took that rejection and forged it into armor. I learned how to read people, how to anticipate disasters, and how to leverage leverage itself. The penthouse I sat in was paid for in cash. The wine I drank cost more than the average car payment. I did not need Marcus or his elite family to elevate my status. I was the status. I owned my life completely. I took another sip of wine, marveling at the sheer silence of my apartment. It was the sound of absolute independence. There is a unique kind of peace that washes over you when you finally stop trying to earn the love of people who are committed to misunderstanding you. For years, I had tried to prove my worth to Beatrice and Richard. I brought home exceptional grades, secured prestigious internships, and launched a thriving business, hoping they would finally look at me with the same blind adoration they showered upon Chloe. I thought my success would eventually bridge the massive gap between us. I was wrong. Success only made them resent me more, because my independence directly threatened their desperate need for absolute control. Realizing this fundamental truth allowed me to completely detach from their toxic ecosystem. Sitting in my penthouse, surrounded by the physical manifestations of my hard work, I realized I did not miss them. I did not miss the constant anxiety, the passive-aggressive remarks, or the exhausting performance required to exist in their presence. My personal phone sat face down on the kitchen island, completely out of reach. Early that morning, I had proactively muted all notifications from mutual acquaintances, distant relatives, and family friends who might feel compelled to send me updates or pitying messages. I did not want to see photos of the extravagant floral arches. I did not care about the designer cake or the choreographed first dance. I had meticulously scrubbed my digital environment of any wedding-related content. A few people had tried to reach out earlier in the week, attempting to play peacemaker, offering unsolicited advice about family forgiveness and burying the hatchet. I politely but firmly shut them down. My boundaries were no longer up for negotiation. I closed the financial spreadsheet on my laptop and opened a new folder containing strategy proposals for my upcoming week. My mind was sharp-focused and unburdened by the toxic demands of my relatives. I leaned my head back against the velvet cushions and closed my eyes, listening to the rain beat against the heavy glass windows. I had successfully insulated myself from their world. Completely. Or so I thought. The absolute silence of my penthouse was suddenly shattered by a sharp, vibrating buzz against the marble countertop of my kitchen island. I kept my eyes closed for a brief moment. My personal phone was turned off, buried under a stack of magazines. This sound was coming from my encrypted work phone, a dedicated line reserved exclusively for catastrophic corporate emergencies. The kind of emergencies that involved plunging stock prices, federal indictments, or chief executives caught in massive scandals. It was not a phone that rang for casual weekend updates. I set my wine glass down on the coffee table and stood up the emerald silk of my pajamas brushing against my legs. I walked across the dark hardwood floor and picked up the device. The screen illuminated, displaying a single name: Maya. My lead assistant was ruthless, hyper-efficient, and entirely devoid of panic. She handled media firestorms with the cold precision of a surgeon. If Maya was calling me on a Saturday night, the world was actively burning. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear. "What is the situation?" I asked, my voice shifting into my authoritative register. "Boss, turn on Twitter." "Right now," Maya said. Her tone was sharp-clipped and completely serious. "I am sending you a direct link to the local trending page. You need to see this immediately." I did not ask questions. I walked back to my velvet sofa, picked up my silver laptop, and opened a new browser tab. I clicked the link Maya had just forwarded to my secure messaging portal. The web page loaded instantly. The local trending topics for our city populated the right side of the screen. Sitting at the absolute #1 spot, dominating the digital conversation with hundreds of thousands of active posts, was my sister's wedding venue. I clicked the top trending hashtag. The screen filled with a chaotic grid of user-generated content. There were no professional photographs of the floral arrangements. There were no curated videos of the couple cutting their 5-tier designer cake. Instead, my feed was flooded with dozens of shaky vertical cell phone videos recorded by panicked guests. Every single thumbnail showed a scene of absolute, unmitigated disaster unfolding inside the grand ballroom of the exclusive country club. I clicked on the video with the highest view count. It already had 2 million views and was climbing rapidly. The footage was unstable, clearly filmed by someone hiding behind a towering floral centerpiece. The background noise was a deafening cacophony of overlapping screams, shouting voices, and the distinct jarring sound of crystal glasses shattering against a marble floor. The camera lens violently refocused, zooming in on the center of the dance floor. There stood Marcus, the supposedly flawless groom, the elite African-American socialite who was meant to elevate my family into the upper echelons of high society. He was wearing his immaculate custom tuxedo, but the facade of the perfect gentleman was completely gone. His face was twisted into an ugly, terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated rage. His jaw was clenched, his eyes wide with furious intensity, and his right hand was tightly gripped around a fistful of Chloe's perfectly styled blonde hair. I watched, my breath catching slightly in my throat as Marcus violently jerked my sister backward. The sheer physical force of the movement caused Chloe to stumble awkwardly in her heavy $15,000 designer gown. She let out a piercing, terrified shriek that cut through the background noise of the ballroom. She reached up with both hands, desperately trying to pry his fingers away from her scalp, but he held on with a terrifying iron grip. The camera panned frantically. The pristine aesthetic my mother and sister had obsessed over was completely destroyed. Tables were overturned. Silver cutlery and expensive china lay scattered across the polished floor. Bridesmaids in matching blush dresses were backing away in sheer terror, covering their mouths, their faces contorted in shock. A few male guests in dark suits lunged forward, shouting at Marcus to let her go, but his bodyguards, towering men in dark suits, aggressively shoved them back, sparking a secondary physical altercation near the head table. It was pure, unadulterated bedlam. The elegant high society reception had devolved into a violent, chaotic brawl within a matter of seconds. I watched the video replay itself automatically, my eyes tracking every detail of the horrifying scene. I clicked on another video from a different angle. This one captured the immediate aftermath. Marcus shoved Chloe to the floor, adjusting his suit jacket with chilling composure, and barked an order at his security team before storming out of the ballroom, leaving his new bride sobbing on the ground amidst broken glass and crushed white roses. I scrolled down to read the comments. The internet is a ruthless, unforgiving machine, and it was already tearing the event apart piece by piece. Digital sleuths were analyzing the footage frame by frame. Commenters were mocking the elite status of the families involved, highlighting the sheer hypocrisy of such a violently trashy display at a country club known for its exclusionary membership policies. Memes were already being generated, contrasting the opulent background decor with the savage nature of the groom's attack. The public relations nightmare was escalating at a terrifying speed. As a crisis manager, my brain automatically began calculating the fallout. The brand damage to everyone in that room was catastrophic and permanent. The digital footprint of this event would live forever. News outlets would pick up the story within the hour. By tomorrow morning, it would be national news. The socialite groom exposed as a violent abuser, the wealthy bride humiliated on her wedding day, the prominent family disgraced in front of their entire network. I sat back against the velvet cushions of my sofa, the laptop screen illuminating my face in the dark penthouse. I felt a bizarre clinical detachment. I smiled entirely to my own reflection. I turned my gaze away from my own reflection in the dark glass of the penthouse window and walked slowly back to the kitchen island. My personal phone remained exactly where I had left it hours ago, face down and entirely silent. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. The interface was clear of any alerts, a peaceful digital landscape that I had carefully curated to protect my peace. I tapped open my settings and navigated to the blocked contacts list. My finger hovered over my mother's name for a fraction of a second before I pressed the unblock button. I did the same for my father and my sister. The reaction was instantaneous. The phone in my hand practically seized as a massive wave of backed-up data crashed into the processor. The screen flashed wildly, illuminating the dim kitchen with a frantic strobe light effect. Notification banners stacked on top of each other in rapid succession. Missed call, voicemail, text message, missed call. The system struggled to process the sheer volume of frantic attempts to reach me. I watched the notification counter climb until it settled on a staggering number. Exactly 50 missed calls from Beatrice alone, dozens more from Richard, and a handful of desperate, panicked texts from Chloe. They had spent the last 2 hours screaming into a digital void, completely cut off from the one person who actually had the power to save them. Before I could even open the first voicemail, the screen transitioned to an incoming call screen. Beatrice was calling again. I let it ring twice, savoring the absolute power I held in this exact second. Then I swiped the green button and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say a word. I simply waited. The audio that assaulted my ear was pure, unadulterated chaos. The piercing, rhythmic wail of police sirens echoed loudly in the background, bouncing off what sounded like the high ceilings of a hotel lobby. I could hear the muffled, frantic voices of hotel security guards shouting instructions, and cutting through all of that noise was the sound of my mother weeping hysterically. It was not her usual performative crying. This was the raw, ugly, hyperventilating sob of a woman whose entire carefully constructed universe had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Vanessa. Beatrice screamed into the receiver, her voice cracking with sheer panic. Oh my God, Vanessa, please tell me you are there. Please tell me you are listening. You have to save us. You have to call your company right now. Get your people on the phone and take the videos down. Make it stop. They are everywhere. Everyone is looking at us. Please make it stop. I stood perfectly still in my immaculate kitchen. The contrast between my serene environment and the sheer terror radiating from the phone was deeply satisfying. I reached over and picked up my crystal wine glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the Pinot Noir, letting the rich vintage coat my tongue before swallowing. I thought my involvement would ruin the aesthetic of the elite socialites, Mother, I said. My voice was dangerously calm, completely devoid of any sympathy or urgency. I thought my severe suits and cynical attitude would make Marcus and his prominent family uncomfortable. I am just a bitter single sister. Why would you want me anywhere near your flawless public image? Beatrice let out a choked, desperate gasp. The sound of her utter humiliation traveled clearly through the speaker. "Please do not do this right now," she begged, her pride entirely abandoned. "I am sorry. I am so sorry for what we said. We were wrong. Everything is ruined. The reception is a crime scene. Chloe is bleeding. The police are here questioning the guests, but Marcus left before they could arrest him. He took his security team and vanished." I walked back to the living room and sank into the velvet sofa. "And why exactly does this require a crisis management firm?" I asked coldly. "If Marcus assaulted Chloe, that is a matter for law enforcement. My company handles public relations, not domestic disputes. Call a lawyer." "We cannot afford a lawyer who can fight him," Beatrice wailed, her voice dropping into a frantic, terrified whisper. "Vanessa, you do not understand what is happening. Marcus is not just walking away. His legal team contacted your father 10 minutes ago. Marcus is threatening to sue Chloe for defamation. He is claiming she provoked him, that she was dangerously intoxicated, and that she single-handedly ruined his elite public image. He is preparing to file a massive lawsuit against us for emotional distress and breach of contract. He is going to destroy your father financially. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. The sheer audacity of the groom was staggering, yet entirely predictable for a man accustomed to buying his way out of consequences. He had violently assaulted my sister on camera, and his immediate response was to weaponize his wealth to silence the victims. He was using the exact same tactic my parents had always used against me, leveraging money and social power to force compliance. "You have the power to shut this down," Beatrice pleaded, her crying renewed. "You control the media narrative. You can bury those videos. You can release a statement blaming the caterers or a rogue guest. We will pay you whatever you want. Just come to the bridal suite at the Grand Plaza Hotel. We are hiding in here while the police clear the ballroom. Please, Vanessa, you are our only hope." I looked at the glowing embers in my fireplace. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse, the constant belittling, and the callous way they had uninvited me from this very event just weeks ago. They wanted me to deploy millions of dollars in corporate resources to clean up a mess they had proudly walked into. They wanted me to save them from a monster they had invited into their home simply because he wore an expensive tuxedo. "Give me your exact suite number," I said. Beatrice sobbed loudly, a sound of profound, pathetic relief. "Suite 402. Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. I knew you would not abandon family." I ended the call without saying goodbye. I set my phone down and stood up. I was going to the Grand Plaza Hotel, but I had absolutely no intention of calling my crisis team. I was not going to draft a single press release or bribe a single tabloid. I walked toward my master bedroom to change out of my silk pajamas and into one of my most severe masculine power suits. I was going to that hotel room solely to grab a front row seat to the fallout. I wanted to look them in the eyes while their empire of lies burned to ash. I stepped out of the elevator on the 4th floor. The corridor was unnervingly quiet, contrasting the digital pandemonium currently engulfing the city. The thick carpet absorbed the sharp clicks of my stiletto heels as I walked toward Suite 402. My dark charcoal power suit felt like armor. The air smelled faintly of expensive floral arrangements and spilled champagne, the ghost of a celebration that had violently imploded. I reached the mahogany door and did not bother knocking. The door was already ajar, the security latch broken, and hanging uselessly. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The visual assault of the bridal suite was immediate and shocking. Hours ago, this space had been a pristine sanctuary of white roses, silk ribbons, and carefully curated high society elegance. Now it looked like the aftermath of a riot. A massive crystal vase had been shattered against the far wall, leaving jagged shards of glass embedded in the plush cream carpet. A room service cart was overturned near the entryway, pooling melted ice and crushed strawberries across the polished hardwood floor. The heavy velvet curtains were partially torn from their brass rods, hanging at a haphazard angle that let the harsh glow of the city's streetlights bleed into the room. In the center of this devastation lay my sister. Chloe was crumpled on the floor near the ruined remnants of a multi-tiered display table. Her $15,000 designer wedding gown, The dress my mother had proudly bragged about for months was completely destroyed. The delicate French lace bodice was torn at the shoulder, and the massive tulle skirt was stained with dark, muddy footprints and spilled red wine. But the most jarring sight was her hair. The flawless blonde waves that had taken hours of styling were a tangled, chaotic mess. One side of her scalp looked red and inflamed, a brutal physical testament to the horrific grip Marcus had used to drag her backward across the dance floor. She was hyperventilating, her shoulders shaking violently as she let out harsh, wet sobs into her hands. The golden child was entirely broken, reduced to a shivering heap on the floor. Pacing frantically back and forth in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows was my father, Richard. He had taken off his tuxedo jacket, and his crisp white dress shirt was completely soaked through with sweat. His face was a dangerously mottled shade of purple, the veins in his neck bulging as he muttered a continuous panicked stream of curses under his breath. He looked like a man watching his entire corporate empire evaporate into thin air, which, given the circumstances, was exactly what was happening. He did not rush to comfort his sobbing daughter on the floor. He simply paced around her, treating her like an obstacle in his path. Beatrice was standing near the overturned room service cart, wringing her hands together with such frantic force that her knuckles were entirely white. Her carefully applied makeup was completely ruined, dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks and staining the collar of her expensive mother of the bride dress. She kept looking between her husband and the man sitting on the other side of the room, her eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal, calculating the odds of survival. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she let out a loud gasp, but she did not move toward me. The shame and sheer terror radiating from her were palpable. And then there was Marcus. The supposedly flawless groom, the elite socialite meant to single-handedly secure our family's position in high society, sat comfortably in a plush velvet armchair in the corner of the suite. The contrast between him and the rest of the room was infuriating. His tuxedo was pristine. There was not a single wrinkle in his jacket, not a speck of dust on his polished shoes. He had one leg casually crossed over the other, resting his elbows on the arms of the chair. He looked incredibly bored, as if waiting for a delayed flight in a VIP lounge rather than sitting in the wreckage of his own wedding reception. His dark eyes scanned me from head to toe as I walked further into the room, his expression radiating arrogance. He did not look like a man who had just violently assaulted a woman on camera. He looked like a man who believed he was entirely untouchable. The tension in the suite was suffocating, a heavy toxic pressure that made it difficult to draw a full breath. No one spoke. The only sounds were Chloe's ragged sobbing and the frantic rhythmic squeak of Richard's patent leather shoes against the floorboards. I stood near the entryway, letting the absolute silence stretch out, forcing them to endure the excruciating discomfort of my presence. I was the very last person they ever wanted to see in this room, yet I was the only lifeline they had left. I looked down at Chloe, who had finally lifted her tear-stained face from her hands. Her makeup was a tragic, smeared mess. She stared at my dark charcoal suit, the exact masculine attire she had banned from her reception just hours earlier. I did not offer a hand. I did not kneel beside her to smooth her ruined hair. I simply stood tall, radiating the cold corporate authority they had mocked my entire life. "Well," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a sharpened blade, "I must say the aesthetic of this reception is certainly unique." The suffocating atmosphere instantly shattered. Beatrice let out a sharp sob, covering her mouth with both hands. Richard stopped pacing and spun around to face me, his eyes desperate. Marcus just smirked, a slow, predatory curving of his lips that sent a chill down my spine. The battle lines were officially drawn. The war had arrived, and I was entirely prepared to watch them all burn. Marcus let out a sharp, derisive scoff that shattered the remaining tension in the room. He did not look embarrassed or ashamed. Instead, he leaned back further into the velvet armchair and casually brushed a microscopic piece of lint from the lapel of his custom tuxedo. He looked down at my sister, who was still trembling on the ruined carpet with an expression of absolute, unvarnished disgust. "She drank too much," Marcus said, his voice smooth and dangerously even. He spoke as if he were explaining a minor logistical error at a corporate luncheon, not addressing the fact that he had just assaulted his bride on camera. She consumed 3 glasses of champagne before the reception even began, and by the time we reached the main ballroom, she was completely hysterical. She embarrassed me in front of my primary investors. She was loud, she was erratic, and she was actively destroying the pristine public image my family has spent decades building. I was simply restraining her. Restraining her, I repeated. The word tasted like ash. I kept my voice perfectly modulated, masking the deep, visceral revulsion pooling in my stomach. You grabbed a fistful of her hair and violently jerked her backward across a marble floor. I would hate to see what you consider an actual assault. Marcus did not flinch. His dark eyes locked onto mine, radiating a cold, calculated arrogance. She was out of control, Vanessa. She tripped over her own $15,000 gown and was about to crash into the head table. I grabbed what I could to stop her from making a complete spectacle of herself. It was an act of preservation. The fact that your local guests panicked and started screaming like animals is hardly my fault. I waited for the explosion. I waited for my father to lunge across the room and grab this monster by the throat. I waited for my mother to scream at him to get out of her sight, to threaten him with police action, to drop to her knees and pull her weeping, injured daughter into a fiercely protective embrace. That is what normal parents would do. That is the bare minimum biological requirement of a mother and a father when faced with the man who just traumatized their child. But Beatrice and Richard were not normal parents. They were parasites feeding on social validation, and Marcus held the keys to their ultimate survival. Beatrice turned her back on Marcus entirely. She looked down at Chloe, her face contorting into a mask of furious, panicked indignation. "What did you say to him, Chloe?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill and accusatory. "What on earth did you do to provoke him like that?" I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer, unadulterated horror of my mother's words wash over the room. She was looking at her golden child, the daughter she had worshipped and pampered for 28 years. The daughter whose scalp was currently raw and bleeding, and she was actively blaming her for being attacked. "Mom," Chloe gasped, her voice cracking as she looked up with wide, terrified eyes. She reached up to touch the side of her head, wincing as her fingers brushed the inflamed skin. He grabbed my hair. He dragged me. I did not do anything wrong. I swear I just asked him why he was yelling at the waitstaff. He grabbed me out of nowhere. "Do not lie to me," Beatrice snapped, pointing a shaking manicured finger at Chloe's tear-stained face. "You know exactly how important his family is. You know the caliber of guests sitting in that ballroom. You were supposed to smile, look beautiful, and keep your mouth shut. Marcus is a highly respected businessman. He does not just snap for absolutely no reason. You must have humiliated him. You must have pushed him over the edge." Richard finally stopped his frantic pacing and stepped forward, siding entirely with his wife and the abuser sitting comfortably in the corner. He did not even look at Chloe. He looked at Marcus with a sickening, subservient desperation. "Marcus, please try to understand." Richard pleaded, his voice dripping with pathetic submission. "She is young. She was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the event. We can issue a public apology immediately. We will say she suffered a medical episode due to exhaustion. We will completely clear your name." I watched this horrific display unfold, feeling a wave of pure, absolute disgust. My parents were actively throwing their youngest daughter under the bus, trading her physical safety and basic human dignity to appease a violent, wealthy tyrant. They were so terrified of losing their proximity to high society that they were willing to let a man abuse their child so long as he kept writing checks and inviting them to exclusive country club dinners. It was the ultimate confirmation of everything I had always known about them. They possessed no loyalty, no love, no moral compass. Their entire existence was a transactional arrangement. Chloe sobbed harder, clutching the torn lace of her ruined dress against her chest. "Daddy, please," she wept, reaching a trembling hand toward Richard. "He hurt me. Look at my head. It hurts so much. Please make him leave. I do not want to be married to him anymore." Richard stepped back, actively avoiding his daughter's outstretched hand. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. We have to look at the bigger picture here, Chloe, he said, his tone devoid of any paternal warmth. You made a commitment today. Marriage is about compromise and overcoming obstacles. You cannot just throw a tantrum and expect us to cancel the most important strategic alliance this family has ever secured. You need to pull yourself together and apologize to your husband. Marcus smiled, a slow, deeply satisfied curving of his lips. He leaned his head back against the velvet chair, thoroughly enjoying the absolute control he wielded over my pathetic, cowardly parents. He had tested the boundaries of their greed, and they had proven themselves completely willing to sell their daughter to the highest bidder without a second thought. And they thought I was the one who needed to be fixed. They had uninvited me because my dark suits and cynical glare would ruin their perfect image. Yet here they were, wallowing in the gutter of their own moral bankruptcy, desperately clinging to a man who had just humiliated them on a global scale. I did not step forward to comfort my sister. I simply watched them drown in the toxic reality they had created. The silence stretched for another grueling minute before Richard finally pivoted. He wiped his face with his ruined handkerchief and turned his desperate, bloodshot eyes toward me. The entire dynamic shifted. I was no longer the outcast daughter who ruined the aesthetic. I was the crisis manager, the only person in the room possessing the necessary tools to extinguish the inferno currently engulfing his life. Vanessa, you have to do something, Richard demanded, his voice cracking with panic. You have an entire corporation dedicated to this exact scenario. You know the right people at the major networks. You have editors on your payroll. You need to pick up your phone right now, call your executive team, and issue a press release. We need a cover story. We will say Chloe had a severe reaction to her medication mixed with champagne. We will say Marcus was trying to catch her before she hit the floor. You have to fix his public image right now. I stared at him, my expression completely blank. I crossed my arms over the front of my charcoal suit. And why exactly would I do that? I asked smoothly. Why would I deploy my corporate resources, risk my agency's impeccable reputation, and commit blatant media fraud to protect a man who just violently assaulted your youngest daughter? What possible incentive do I have to save him? Richard took a step toward me, his hands shaking violently at his sides. Because he is our only lifeline, he screamed, the last shred of his dignity completely evaporating. The vein in his forehead pulsed dangerously. Marcus and his family just injected $5 million into my logistics company. $5 million in capital funding, Vanessa. My company has been bleeding out for 18 months. The banks refused to extend our credit lines. We were 3 weeks away from filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. If Marcus walks out that door, he takes the funding with him. If he walks away, I go bankrupt. I lose the business. We lose the estate. We lose absolutely everything. The confession hung heavily in the stale air of the bridal suite. The ugly, unvarnished truth was finally exposed for everyone to see. My parents had not pushed for this wedding because they thought Marcus was a good man. They had not obsessed over the elite guest list or the floral arrangements because they wanted Chloe to have a beautiful life. They had done it because they were flat broke, and they were using their 28-year-old daughter as human collateral to secure a corporate bailout. They had literally sold her to a wealthy abuser to save their own comfortable suburban lifestyle. Beatrice rushed forward, grabbing her husband's arm as if to physically support his crumbling posture. She looked at me with wild, terrified eyes. Your father is telling the truth, Vanessa. We are completely out of money. The country club memberships, the cars, the mortgage on the house, it is all financed on debt. Marcus saved us. His family wired the first installment of the investment capital just 3 days ago. If this scandal ruins his reputation, his board of directors will force him to pull the investment under the morality clause in our contract. You have to protect him. You are the only one who can bury those videos before the morning news cycle picks them up. I shifted my gaze down to Chloe. She was still sitting on the crushed roses and shattered glass, her hands resting limply in her lap. The tears had stopped, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. She looked up at our father, her chest heaving with shallow breaths. You sold me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You knew he had a bad temper. You saw how he yelled at me during the rehearsal dinner. You saw him grab my arm in the hallway last week, and you told me to just keep him happy. You forced me to marry him so you could pay off your credit cards. Richard refused to meet her eyes. He stared at the carpet, his jaw locked tight. It was a strategic partnership, Chloe, he muttered defensively. We all have to make sacrifices for the survival of this family. You get a luxury lifestyle and a billionaire husband. I get the funding to keep my company afloat. It was supposed to be a mutually beneficial arrangement. A mutually beneficial arrangement, I repeated, letting the absolute depravity of the phrase sink into the room. You pimped out your youngest daughter to a violent predator to cover up your own financial incompetence. And now that he has publicly battered her, your first instinct is to demand that your eldest daughter cover up his crimes. You are not parents, you are parasites. Marcus chuckled from his velvet armchair. The sound was dark and deeply unsettling. He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked at me with a sickening level of respect, recognizing a fellow predator in the room, even though he severely misjudged my intentions. Your father is a desperate man, Vanessa Marcus said smoothly. And desperate men make excellent business partners because they are highly motivated to keep their mouths shut. I bought this family. I bought your father's silence. I bought your mother's loyalty. And I bought your sister to be a pretty quiet accessory for my corporate events. I paid a premium price for a flawless product, and tonight she was defective. So yes, you are going to fix my public image. Because if you refuse, your father loses his company, your mother loses her mansion, and your sister loses the only thing she actually values, which is my credit limit. They have absolutely no leverage here, and neither do you. Fix it immediately, or watch your entire pathetic family burn tonight. I did not break eye contact with Marcus. I did not shrink under the heavy weight of his threat. I simply tilted my head, analyzing him the way a scientist might observe a particularly repulsive insect trapped under a microscope. He genuinely believed his wealth granted him absolute immunity from any consequence. He believed my family was his personal property, purchased through a desperate business transaction, and he assumed that ownership included me. Before I could address his arrogant ultimatum, Richard stepped directly into my line of sight. My father completely ignored the terrifying fact that a man had just threatened to destroy his entire family. Instead, Richard saw Marcus and his threat as a strict business deadline that needed to be met immediately. He marched toward me, his face slick with nervous sweat, his posture aggressive and highly demanding. "Vanessa, you heard him?" Richard barked, pointing a thick, trembling finger at my chest. "This is no longer a polite request. This is an absolute mandate. You are the CEO of the most ruthless crisis management firm in the state. You have professional fixers on your corporate payroll. You have direct lines to the editors of every major publication in the country. I need you to authorize an immediate emergency budget. $2 million should cover it." I blinked slowly, letting the sheer audacity of his demand echo in the quiet space of the ruined suite. $2 million, I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously flat and devoid of any emotion. "Do not play games with me right now," Richard snapped, stepping even closer until I could smell the stale champagne and sheer panic rolling off his skin. $2 million directly from your corporate accounts. It is a drop in the bucket for your agency. You will wire the funds to your media contacts tonight. You are going to buy the silence of every tabloid, every local news station, and every digital aggregator that is currently hosting those videos. I know exactly how your industry works. You pay them to kill the story, and they bury the footage permanently. Beatrice eagerly moved to stand beside him, nodding her head vigorously. Her eyes were wide with a frantic, greedy light. "Yes, exactly. And we already have the perfect counter-narrative prepared." She grabbed her silver clipboard from the overturned room service cart, acting as if she were pitching a brilliant marketing campaign to investors, rather than actively covering up a violent assault on her own daughter. "We release a coordinated statement by midnight," Beatrice continued, her voice gaining a sickening level of forced enthusiasm. "We state unequivocally that an uninvited, heavily intoxicated guest crashed the reception. We claim this rogue guest became highly aggressive and attempted to physically attack Chloe on the dance floor. We explicitly state that Marcus was simply stepping in as a protective husband, pulling her out of harm's way. We spin him into the absolute hero. Your PR firm will flood the internet with this positive narrative. You use your bots, your influencers, your vast media connections. You make the public believe Marcus saved her life. I looked down at Chloe. She was still sitting on the carpet, tightly clutching her torn designer gown. She was listening to our parents actively construct a massive, elaborate lie to protect the man who had just ripped a handful of hair from her bleeding scalp. She did not say a single word. She just stared blankly at the floor, utterly defeated by their profound betrayal. "Let me make sure I understand the complete scope of your extortion," I said, looking back at my parents with absolute disgust. "You want me to embezzle $2 million from my own corporate treasury. You want me to commit federal wire fraud by bribing journalists. You want me to fabricate a completely fictitious assailant potentially framing an innocent person. And you want me to do all of this illegal work to legally protect a man who treats women like chew toys. It is your duty as the eldest daughter," Beatrice yelled, slamming her hand against the metal clipboard. Her face contorted with vicious, unearned indignation. "We gave you life. We raised you. We provided you with the foundation to become the success you are today. You owe this family. You owe us your loyalty, your resources, and your absolute protection. This is about preserving our legacy. You have spent your entire adult life being incredibly selfish, building your little empire while completely ignoring your familial obligations. It is time you finally paid us back." Richard crossed his arms, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of patriarchal authority. "Your mother is entirely correct, Vanessa. Family protects family. You have the capital and you have the infrastructure. We are commanding you to use it right now. If my logistics company goes under because you refuse to clean up this mess, your sister's ruined future, and our absolute financial destruction will rest entirely on your shoulders. You will be responsible for making your parents homeless." Marcus laughed again from his velvet throne. He was thoroughly enjoying the chaotic show. "Listen to your father, Vanessa. Be a good daughter. Be a good sister. Write the check, spin the story, and maybe I will let your father keep a minor executive title when my board takes full control of his failing company next quarter. Play your part, or I drag this entire family into a highly publicized, incredibly ugly court battle that will leave all of you completely destitute." They really believed I would fold under the pressure. They really believed the guilt trip about my duty as the eldest daughter would somehow override my basic common sense and legal boundaries. Beatrice took another step forward, lowering her voice into a tone she probably thought sounded maternal, but actually just sounded incredibly manipulative and entirely desperate. "Think about the prestige," Vanessa Beatrice whispered, her eyes pleading with me to accept her delusion. "If you fix this, Marcus will owe you. His elite family will owe you. They have massive corporate connections that could double your client list overnight. You would not just be saving your father, you would be rapidly expanding your own empire. We are handing you the ultimate networking opportunity on a silver platter. You just have to spend the $2 million to secure the relationship. It is a brilliant investment in your own future." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the endless depths of her delusion. She was trying to sell me a business proposition built entirely on the foundation of my sister's physical assault. She was trying to convince me that bribing tabloids and covering up severe domestic violence was simply a brilliant networking strategy. Richard nodded eagerly, backing up her absurd pitch. "Your mother is giving you excellent business advice. You handle corporate crises every day. You clean up massive messes for complete strangers. Why are you hesitating when your own blood is on the line? We are offering you a chance to be the hero of this family. We are offering you a chance to finally prove that you care about someone other than yourself." The sheer hypocrisy was absolutely breathtaking. They were weaponizing my success while simultaneously demanding I destroy it to serve their needs. They wanted me to be their savior, their personal ATM, and their ultimate scapegoat all at once. I took a slow, deep breath, letting their words echo in the silent hotel suite. I looked at Richard and Beatrice, my expression completely devoid of the compliance they expected. I did not raise my voice. I did not flail my arms in desperation. I simply let out a low, cold laugh that seemed to freeze the air in the room. "You want me to drop $2 million of my own corporate capital to save a man who abuses women?" I asked, each word precise and lethal. "You want me to risk federal prison for wire fraud to protect your social standing? Is this brilliant business advice supposed to be similar to the brilliant strategy you pitched me 15 years ago? The color instantly drained from Richard's face. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Beatrice took a quick step back, her silver clipboard clattering against the overturned room service cart. I have no idea what you mean, Beatrice stammered, her voice suddenly thin and reedy. We have always had your best interests at heart. My best interests, I repeated, closing the distance between us. Is that what we are calling it now? Because my memory is exceptionally clear. I remember being 18 years old, a student with a full scholarship to Stanford. I remember walking into your study, Richard holding that acceptance letter, expecting you to be proud. Instead, you handed me a different contract. Chloe, who had been sobbing quietly on the floor, looked up. She wiped her smeared mascara, confusion breaking through her panic. Marcus even sat up slightly in his velvet chair, clearly intrigued by the sudden shift in the family dynamic. Stop it, Vanessa, Richard hissed, looking nervously toward Marcus. This is ancient history. It has absolutely no bearing on the current crisis. It has everything to do with the current crisis, I shot back, my voice echoing off the high ceiling of the suite. Because it proves exactly who you are. You have a very specific playbook, Richard. When you run your businesses into the ground through your own sheer incompetence, you use your daughters as financial collateral to bail yourself out. I turned my attention to Chloe, making sure she heard every single word. Did they ever tell you, Chloe, why I actually left the house? They told you I was rebellious. They told you I was an ungrateful delinquent who wanted to party instead of contributing to the family. That is what they said, Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. It was a lie, I stated firmly. The truth is, when I was 18, Richard's first logistics company was facing absolute bankruptcy, much like it is today. His primary investor was a 50-year-old man named Arthur Vance. Arthur had expressed a rather sickening interest in me for years, so Richard and Beatrice formulated a plan. They told me I had to decline my scholarship to Stanford. They told me I was going to marry Arthur Vance, a man 32 years my senior, so he would forgive Richard's massive corporate debt. Beatrice covered her face with her hands, letting out a small, pathetic whimper. Richard stood frozen, completely exposed, and when I refused, I continued, my gaze fixed intensely on my father. When I told you I would rather die than marry a predator to pay off your credit lines. What did you do, Richard? You did not support me. You did not protect your child. You packed my belongings in garbage bags. You confiscated my car keys. You drained my modest savings account that I had earned working retail. You kicked me out into the street at 2 a.m. with exactly $0 in my pocket. You told me I was dead to you. The absolute silence in the bridal suite was deafening. The ugly, rotten core of our family had been ripped open and laid bare for everyone to examine. You survived, Beatrice whispered, a pathetic attempt at justification. You built a successful life. We pushed you to be independent. I survived despite you, not because of you, I corrected her coldly. I slept on the floors of 24-hour libraries. I worked 3 jobs while attending community college. I built my empire with blood, sweat, and absolute terror because my own parents threw me to the wolves to save their country club memberships. And now, 15 years later, you have the sheer audacity to demand $2 million of my hard-earned money to bail you out of the exact same mistake. You just traded Chloe instead of me, and you ended up with an abusive criminal instead of a creepy investor. I looked down at Chloe, whose eyes were wide with horrifying realization. She was finally seeing our parents not as the protective figures they pretended to be, but as the ruthless, calculating brokers they truly were. They did not force you into this marriage because Marcus was a good man, Chloe, I said gently, offering her the ugly truth she desperately needed to hear. They forced you into it because they were broke, and you were the only asset they had left to sell. They did not care if he hurt you. They only care that the check clears. That is a lie, Richard yelled, his panic completely overriding any remaining sense of decorum. We love you, Chloe. We secured a brilliant future for you. Vanessa is just bitter and jealous. She is trying to destroy this family out of pure spite. But the lie had lost its power. The absolute desperation in Richard's voice only confirmed everything I had just revealed. They had spent decades prioritizing their fragile social standing over the safety and well-being of their children. They had created a toxic environment where love was entirely conditional on financial compliance. I turned back to Richard, my expression resolute. I am not going to spend a single dime to save you. I am not going to write a press release. I am not going to bribe a tabloid. I am going to stand right here and watch the consequences of your actions finally catch up with you. You sold your daughters, Richard. Now it is time to pay the bill. I will ruin you, Richard threatened, though he looked incredibly small and pathetic. I will tell the press you refuse to help your own sister. I will destroy your agency. Go ahead, I challenged him, a slow smile spreading across my face. Tell the press. Tell them exactly why I refused. Tell them I declined to commit federal wire fraud to cover up a violent assault perpetrated by the man you sold your daughter to. Let us see how the public reacts to that narrative. The bluff was completely empty, and we both knew it. He had no leverage. He had no power. He was simply a desperate man, watching his empire crumble, entirely unable to stop the destruction he had initiated. How would you handle family members who prioritize their social standing over your physical safety? Have you ever had to expose a long-held family secret to protect yourself? The heavy silence that followed my revelation was abruptly shattered, not by an apology or a plea for protection, but by the frantic rustling of shredded silk. I watched as Chloe scrambled to her feet, her movements clumsy as she tripped over the ripped hem of her $15,000 gown. She did not run to the door or ask me to help her escape her assaulter. Instead, she turned her back on her own survival and faced me, her expression contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She raised a shaking, manicured finger and pointed it directly at my chest. "You did this!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with a toxic mixture of panic and delusion. "You set this entire thing up. You sent someone to film us." I stared at her, genuinely taken aback by the sheer magnitude of her denial. For a brief second, I had actually pitied her. I had offered her the ugly, unvarnished truth about our parents, handing her the exact clarity she needed to break free from their manipulative grip. I had given her a profound validation, proving that she was a victim of their financial greed. But the truth was entirely incompatible with the fragile status-obsessed reality she had constructed for herself. "You orchestrated this entire viral campaign to ruin my life!" Chloe shrieked, taking a step toward me. The redness on her scalp where Marcus grabbed her hair was glaringly visible, yet she ignored her fresh injuries to defend her abuser. "You have always been insanely jealous of me. You were furious that I was having the perfect wedding. You could not stand that I secured a wealthy, powerful man while you have nobody. So you hired someone to infiltrate my reception film, Marcus, during a highly stressful moment, and post it online to destroy my flawless aesthetic." The sheer absurdity of her accusation echoed off the walls of the ruined bridal suite. She was actually standing feet away from the man who had just dragged her across a marble floor, and she was actively attempting to frame me for exposing his violence. She was desperately clinging to her billionaire groom, completely willing to sacrifice her own physical safety, just to keep her hands wrapped around his platinum credit cards. I looked over at Marcus. Even he seemed momentarily surprised by the absolute depths of her pathetic submission. A slow, dark chuckle rumbled in his chest. He leaned his head against the velvet chair, thoroughly entertained by the spectacle of his battered bride viciously attacking her only potential savior. He did not even need to defend himself. My sister was doing his dirty work for him, eagerly throwing herself back under his boot. Beatrice and Richard immediately latched onto Chloe's unhinged narrative. It was the perfect scapegoat for their own profound failures. "Yes," Beatrice gasped, her eyes widening with a manufactured sense of righteous indignation. "You have the media contacts, Vanessa. You have the digital infrastructure to make a video go viral in minutes. You planned this sabotage because you are a bitter, vindictive woman who cannot bear to see your sister achieve the high society status you rejected." Richard pointed his finger at me, his chest puffing out again as he regained his false bravado. You orchestrated a targeted hit on my logistics company by attacking my primary investor on his wedding day. This is corporate espionage disguised as family drama. You are going to pay for this, Vanessa. We will sue your agency for every single dime you have. I stood my ground, my posture remaining perfectly relaxed. The final shred of familial obligation I held for my sister completely evaporated, leaving nothing but cold, clinical detachment. Chloe was entirely beyond saving. The corruption of our parents' vanity had infected her down to the bone. She was so deeply indoctrinated into their cult of materialism that she would rather be beaten in a designer gown than walk away in plain clothes. You really believe I care enough about your generic country club wedding to orchestrate a covert media operation? I asked, my tone dripping with absolute condescension. You think I sit in my penthouse agonizing over your floral arrangements? You are not that important, Chloe. You are just a casualty of your own vanity. I never hired anyone to film your reception. Your own guests filmed you. Your high society friends, the elite socialites you were so desperate to impress, pulled out their cell phones and recorded your husband treating you like a stray dog because they love a good scandal. Chloe covered her ears with her hands. Shut up, she wailed, refusing to let reality penetrate her delusion. You are lying. Marcus loves me. He was just stressed. You provoked this entire disaster to make me look like a fool. I did not provoke anything, I stated firmly. Marcus assaulted you because he is a violent predator, and you are defending him because you are completely hollow inside. You want to stay married to him. Go ahead. Enjoy the mansion. Enjoy the credit cards. But do not ever expect me to shield you from the consequences of your own pathetic choices. Chloe glared at me, her eyes burning with a desperate, venomous fury. I will make sure everyone knows what you did today, she hissed, stepping backward to stand closer to Marcus. I will tell the press that you manufactured this entire crisis. You are dead to me. You are dead to this family. I watched Chloe reach out and place her trembling hand on Marcus's shoulder, seeking comfort from the monster who had just ripped her hair out. It was the most sickening display of submission I had ever witnessed in my professional career. She had finally chosen her side in this miserable war. By choosing Marcus, she had actively activated a chain of events that would leave her with absolutely nothing. I simply smiled silently, waiting for the arrogant groom to speak his mind. Marcus finally decided it was time to reclaim the spotlight. He moved with a deliberate, predatory grace that commanded the attention of everyone in the ruined bridal suite. He casually brushed Chloe's trembling hand off his shoulder, as if swiping away a bothersome insect. He did not look at her as she stumbled slightly backward, her torn lace gown catching on the debris. He stood up to his full height, towering over the room, a looming silhouette against the harsh glow of the city streetlights bleeding through the torn velvet curtains. He adjusted the cuffs of his pristine custom tuxedo, straightening his silk bow tie with infuriating composure. Every single movement was explicitly calculated to project absolute dominance. He wanted to ensure I knew exactly who was in charge of this environment. He took a slow, measured step toward me, his polished dress shoes crunching loudly over the shards of broken crystal embedded in the cream carpet. The physical contrast between us was stark. He was a massive, physically imposing man who utilized his size to intimidate and coerce anyone who dared to challenge his authority. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly rigid in my charcoal power suit, refusing to yield a single inch of territory to a domestic abuser. He stopped less than 2 feet away from me, deliberately invading my personal space, in a blatant attempt to force me to step backward. I held my position, keeping my chin high, and my gaze locked directly onto his face. He looked down at me, his dark eyes glittering with a toxic mixture of immense amusement and raw, unadulterated hostility. Listen to me very carefully. You corporate nobody, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a dangerously low register that reverberated through the quiet, tense room. You think you are incredibly smart. You think because you run some boutique crisis management agency that you are completely untouchable. You think you can waltz into my hotel suite, lecture me about morality, insult my bride and walk out without facing any severe consequences. He let out a harsh, patronizing laugh that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. You have absolutely no idea what real power looks like. You operate in the shallow end of the corporate pool, handling minor scandals for local politicians and regional businesses. My family operates on an elite global scale. We move massive markets. We destroy lucrative careers before breakfast. You are a minor inconvenience, Vanessa. You are a negligible speed bump on my path. And I am going to give you exactly one chance to get out of my way before I run you over completely. Richard and Beatrice watched him with bated breath, utterly mesmerized by his display of toxic authority. They looked at him with profound reverence, worshipping the very arrogance that had just victimized their youngest daughter. Chloe stared at his broad back with pathetic, unwavering devotion, entirely captivated by the monster who had ripped out her hair. Marcus leaned in closer, his voice laced with venomous certainty. "You are going to open your laptop right now," Marcus demanded, pointing a rigid, commanding finger at the glass coffee table across the room. "You are going to activate your entire staff. You will authorize endless overtime, and you will scrub this pathetic incident off the internet entirely. I want every single video taken down from every platform. I want every tweet deleted. I want aggressive cease and desist letters sent to every guest who dared to hold up a cell phone in my ballroom. You will bury this narrative so deep that by tomorrow morning the public will think my wedding was an absolute fairy tale. You will issue a public statement claiming a disgruntled ex-employee fabricated the entire altercation. You will spend whatever corporate funds it takes, and you will do it immediately. You are not leaving this suite until my name is completely cleared of this ridiculous social media circus. Your parents understand how the real world works. Your sister understands how to fall in line. It is time for you to learn your place in the hierarchy. If you refuse to cooperate," Marcus continued, his tone shifting seamlessly from demanding to openly threatening, "I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life." Have you ever heard of Global Elite? They are the largest, most ruthless public relations conglomerate in the entire country. They hold exclusive contracts with half the Fortune 500. They literally control the national media narrative. My family has them on an exorbitant retainer. If you do not fix my public image by midnight, I will unleash their entire corporate machine on your tiny agency. I will have them launch a coordinated smear campaign against you that will leave your reputation in absolute tatters. I will make sure you lose every single client you have by tomorrow morning. They will relentlessly poach your staff, bankrupt your accounts, and blacklist you from the industry forever. You will be completely destitute. You will lose your penthouse, your business, and your precious independence. You will be crawling back to your parents begging for a loan, and they will turn you away because you defied me. He smiled, a cold shark like baring of teeth. He thought he had me completely cornered. He thought dropping the name of a massive corporate conglomerate would instantly send me into a severe spiral of professional panic. He fully expected me to crumble, to apologize profusely, to pull out my phone and start frantically calling my media contacts just to save my own skin. The heavy, oppressive silence stretched endlessly as Beatrice and Richard waited eagerly for my inevitable surrender. I simply smiled silently, waiting for the arrogant groom to finally finish speaking his mind, fully prepared for the incoming knock on the door that would change absolutely everything. I did not flinch. I let a terrifying smile spread across my face. He laid his cards on the table, unaware I held the deck. The oppressive silence of the ruined bridal suite was abruptly shattered by an authoritative knock echoing against the mahogany door. 3 rapid strikes demanded immediate attention. Richard jumped, spinning toward the entryway with panicked eyes. Beatrice gasped, clutching her hands against her chest. Marcus narrowed his eyes, his confident posture stiffening at the unexpected intrusion. I kept my gaze locked directly onto Marcus, my smile widening into something lethal. The door pushed open. Stepping over the broken security latch with effortless grace was Maya. My lead assistant was the embodiment of corporate warfare. She wore a tailored black blazer and razor-sharp trousers, radiating an intimidating level of competence. She ignored the chaotic destruction, not glancing at the shattered crystal or the disheveled family cowering in the corners. Her face was a masterclass in professional detachment. In her left hand, Maya carried a stack of manila legal folders. In her right, she held a sleek silver laptop. The sight of her instantly shifted the power dynamic. She operated entirely on my command. "Who the hell is this?" Richard barked, his voice cracking with fear. "This is a private suite. We are dealing with a sensitive family emergency. Leave immediately before I call hotel security." Maya did not acknowledge his existence. She treated my father with the exact respect one might afford a piece of lint. She walked past him with purposeful steps, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She approached the glass coffee table positioned between my parents and the velvet armchair where Marcus sat. With precision, she placed the silver laptop squarely in the center of the table and laid the stack of legal folders neatly beside it. Then she took 2 steps back, standing like a sentinel, waiting for her next order. "This is my lead crisis coordinator," I said, breaking my silence. My voice was calm, cutting through Richard's blustering. "And she goes nowhere unless I tell her to." Beatrice clutched Richard's arm, her eyes darting between me and the laptop. "Vanessa, what are you doing?" Beatrice asked, her tone vibrating with terror. "What is in those folders? You are supposed to be helping us fix this. Why bring your staff into a private family matter?" I turned my attention back to the groom. Marcus watched the laptop intently. The absolute certainty he had projected moments ago was beginning to crack. His jaw tightened. He recognized the tactical shift. He knew people operating in the shallow end of the pool do not deploy assets with this level of calculated intimidation. "Before you crush me, Marcus," I said, my voice smooth and dripping with dark anticipation. "Before you unleash your massive conglomerate and destroy my tiny agency by tomorrow morning, I think you should listen to a little wedding gift my team prepared for you." Marcus sneered, though the gesture lacked conviction. "I do not have time for your pathetic corporate theatrics. I gave you a direct order. You are going to scrub the internet, or I am going to end your career. There is nothing on that computer that changes the reality of your father's impending bankruptcy." "That is where you are catastrophically wrong," I replied, taking a slow step toward the coffee table. "You see, my agency does not blindly issue press releases to cover up the messes of arrogant men. We run comprehensive background diagnostics on every liability threatening our clients. When my mother called begging me to deploy millions to clean up your violent tantrum, I directed Maya to run a full diagnostic on you." Chloe whimpered from the floor, clutching her torn designer gown. "What did you do, Vanessa?" she cried. "Just do what he says. Stop trying to ruin everything. Stop trying to destroy my marriage." I looked down at my sister. "I am not destroying your marriage, Chloe. I am simply pulling back the curtain. You wanted a high society aesthetic. You wanted an elite billionaire. Let us see exactly what kind of man you just pledged your life to." I reached out and opened the silver laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a bluish glow across the dark room. Maya leaned forward seamlessly and typed a security password, unlocking the encrypted desktop. She opened an audio file and maximized the media player on the screen. The interface displayed a waveform representing a recorded conversation. "What is this?" Marcus demanded, his voice dropping into a harsh growl. He gripped the armrests of his velvet chair, his knuckles turning white. He was preparing to lunge, preparing to use physical violence the second he felt his control slipping away entirely. "This," I said, pointing a finger at the screen, "is a digital interception. My team monitors dark web data exchanges. We pulled this file from a highly encrypted server 30 minutes ago. It is a recorded phone call you made exactly 4 days before putting that ring on my sister's finger." Richard took a hesitant step forward, his face slick with perspiration. "Vanessa, stop this right now. You are violating federal privacy laws. You cannot intercept private phone calls. You are going to get us thrown in prison." "I am doing exactly what you demanded, Richard," I countered. My eyes locked on the screen. "You commanded me to deploy my resources to manage this crisis. This is crisis management. You cannot fix a burning building until you find the arsonist holding the matches." I hovered my finger over the trackpad, resting it squarely on the play button. The tension in the bridal suite felt like physical weight pressing down on my chest. Beatrice was holding her breath. Chloe stared at the laptop with terrified eyes. Marcus was frozen, a bead of sweat rolling down the side of his contoured face. He knew he was trapped. "Enjoy your gift," I whispered. I pressed play and smiled. The metallic click of the trackpad sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence of the suite. From the high-fidelity speakers of the sleek silver laptop, a crisp, crystal-clear audio file began to play. There was no static, no distortion, just the pristine digital recording of a phone ringing twice before a woman answered. "Marcus." The female voice purred from the speakers, dripping with a familiar, cloying intimacy. "Tell me you are almost done with this charade. I cannot stand watching her post those pathetic wedding countdowns on social media." I watched Chloe physically flinch. The tears that had been streaming down her face abruptly halted. The ragged, hysterical sobs that had filled the room just moments ago instantly evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, paralyzing shock. She stared at the laptop as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the coffee table. Then Marcus's voice filled the room. It was undeniably him. It carried the exact same arrogant, resonant baritone he had just used to threaten me. The same smooth cadence he used to charm my foolish parents. "Don't worry, baby." Marcus's recorded voice resonated through the suite, smooth and dripping with malicious amusement. "The hardest part is almost over. Once I marry this gullible idiot on Saturday, the legal trap snaps shut. We secure the marital asset protections, and I am transferring all my hidden offshore debt directly into her name." The color instantly drained from Beatrice's face. The heavy layers of designer makeup could not hide the sickly ashen gray that washed over her complexion. She raised a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between the laptop and the man sitting in the velvet armchair. Richard looked as though the floor had just dropped out from underneath him. His chest stopped heaving. His breathing turned incredibly shallow. "Are you sure her father will not catch on the woman on the recording?" asked a cruel laugh bubbling beneath her words. "You said he is a businessman." Marcus scoffed loudly on the recording, a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Richard is a desperate, pathetic old man pretending he still has capital. Her daddy's logistics company is bleeding out completely. He is weeks away from total insolvency. They are all so blinded by the country club aesthetic and the fake pedigree I sold them that they are far too stupid to notice the shell companies I have already embedded in his supply chain. The second the marriage certificate is signed, his remaining corporate assets become the collateral for my frozen accounts. I get clean money, he takes the fall for the federal debt, and his precious daughter takes on $10 million in liability." I reached out and tapped the spacebar, pausing the playback. The abrupt silence that followed was heavier than a physical weight. No one moved. No one spoke. The absolute devastation of the recording hung in the air, a lethal poison that had just decimated their entire reality. Every single illusion my parents had desperately clung to was annihilated in less than 60 seconds. The wealthy savior was a financial parasite. The prominent socialite was a ruthless predator. The perfect marriage was a calculated, devastating corporate trap. I looked down at Chloe. The transformation was absolute. The golden child was entirely broken, but not by physical violence this time. The psychological blow had completely hollowed her out. She stared blankly at the floor, her hands releasing their tight grip on her torn designer gown. The realization that she was never loved, never desired, and merely utilized as a disposable pawn for a man transferring offshore debt had shattered her core. She had traded her safety, her dignity, and her sister for a man who viewed her as a gullible idiot. Richard staggered backward, his knees buckling slightly until the back of his legs hit the edge of a crushed sofa. He braced himself against the armrest, his mouth opening and closing in a desperate bid for oxygen. He had practically begged this man to take his daughter. He had offered up his own company on a silver platter, entirely convinced he was orchestrating the financial deal of the century. Instead, he had personally invited a parasite to feast on the remaining scraps of his dying empire. Beatrice let out a high-pitched strangled keen. It was the sound of a woman watching her social standing burn to ash. There would be no elite country club dinners. There would be no prominent alliances. There would only be crushing, inescapable debt and public humiliation. I turned my gaze to Marcus. The infuriating arrogance that had defined his posture just moments ago was severely fractured. His hands gripped the velvet armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were stark white. A bead of sweat traced a slow, erratic path down his temple. He stared at the silver laptop, his mind racing frantically to calculate the damage. "That is a fabrication," Marcus declared, his voice lacking the commanding resonance it possessed earlier. He pushed himself upright, his chest heaving. "That is an artificial intelligence deep fake. You generated that audio to frame me. You programmed a vocal clone to destroy my marriage because you are a jealous, spiteful woman." I let out a slow, mocking laugh. Maya remained perfectly still beside the table, her expression radiating professional disdain. "Do not insult my intelligence, Marcus," I said, keeping my tone razor sharp. "Deep fakes leave digital artifacts. My cybersecurity team verified the source encryption, the metadata, and the carrier signal. We traced the call directly to your burner phone. We identified the woman on the other end of the line. We know her name, her address, and exactly which offshore accounts she manages for you. This is not a fabricated narrative. This is your exact, miserable reality, being broadcast directly into the room." He took a step toward the coffee table, his eyes locking onto the laptop, as if he intended to physically smash the device to pieces. Maya smoothly shifted her weight perfectly, positioning herself between the groom and the evidence, her hand resting casually on her hip. "You really thought you could outsmart everyone?" I continued, my voice echoing in the quiet suite. "You found a desperate family obsessed with status, and you played them perfectly. You recognized Richard's financial incompetence, and you exploited Beatrice's shallow vanity. You selected the most superficial, easily manipulated daughter, and used her as a shield against federal investigators. It was a brilliant, ruthless scam. But you made one catastrophic miscalculation." I took a step closer, ensuring he could see the absolute victory burning in my eyes. "You assumed they had already cut me out completely," I said. "You assumed the bitter, estranged sister would stay far away from your perfect aesthetic. You never anticipated that these pathetic, desperate people would call me in a panic and beg me to deploy my corporate assets to save your public image. You invited the one person who actually possesses the resources to dig up your graves." Marcus stood completely frozen, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The trap had closed. He had threatened to crush me with a public relations conglomerate, entirely unaware that I commanded an intelligence network capable of exposing his deepest financial crimes. He had demanded I scrub his assault from the internet, completely ignorant of the fact that I now held the evidence to put him in federal prison for conspiracy and wire fraud. Chloe remained on the floor, her eyes utterly vacant. Richard was gasping for air against the sofa, clutching his chest. Beatrice stood paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare she had actively funded and endorsed. The elite African-American socialite, the flawless groom, the ultimate financial savior, was nothing more than a desperate criminal running out of time. And I held every single piece of his destruction in the palm of my hand. The shockwaves radiating from the laptop had barely begun to settle before I dealt the absolute fatal blow. I did not give them a single second to catch their breath or attempt to rationalize the horrors they had just heard. The complete financial demolition of their pathetic empire was the only logical next step. I reached for the stack of legal folders Maya had placed on the coffee table. I picked up the thickest one, a heavy manila envelope bursting with printed financial diagnostics, federal wire transfer records, and intercepted offshore banking data. I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the floorboards, and aggressively tossed the folder directly onto Richard's chest. It hit him with a solid, satisfying thud. He instinctively grabbed it, his trembling fingers fumbling with the clasp. "Marcus's family did not inject $5 million into your logistics company, Dad," I stated, my voice echoing with lethal clarity. "There is no legitimate investment capital. There is no strategic high society partnership. They used your failing, heavily indebted company as a convenient front to launder massive amounts of dirty money. Richard frantically ripped open the folder, his eyes darting across the pages. He was a terrible businessman, but even he could recognize the stark reality of federal indictments when they were printed in black and white. Marcus's personal and corporate assets were completely frozen by the federal government 3 months ago. I continued ensuring every word landed with devastating precision. He is currently under active investigation for systemic wire fraud, international money laundering, and severe tax evasion. He does not have a single dime to his name. He is entirely broke, Richard. You did not sell your daughter to a billionaire. You sold her to a desperate criminal who needed a naive, financially illiterate scapegoat to absorb his legal liabilities. The sound of Marcus's velvet chair scraping violently against the floorboards shattered the silence. The calculated, arrogant facade completely vanished, replaced by the raw, aggressive desperation of a cornered predator. He let out a furious, guttural roar and lunged across the room, his large hands reaching directly for my throat. He did not make it past the coffee table. Maya moved with terrifying efficiency. She did not scream or flinch. She simply pivoted on her heel, placing her body squarely between Marcus and me. She raised her left arm in a defensive block, while her right hand dropped smoothly to her hip, her fingers locking around the canister of professional-grade pepper spray secured to her belt. Her stance was absolute, unyielding stone. "Take one more step toward my CEO," Maya said, her voice dropping into a chilling, emotionless register, "and I will permanently blind you before the police even reach this floor." Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at Maya, his chest heaving, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were stark white. He calculated the odds and realized instantly that he was completely outmatched. He slowly backed away, retreating to his velvet chair like a beaten dog, his dark eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred. Richard collapsed onto the sofa, the financial documents spilling across his lap. The realization of his absolute ruin hit him with the force of a freight train. He grabbed his hair, pulling at the roots, his breathing turning into shallow, panicked gasps. "It is all fraudulent," Richard choked out, staring blankly at the ceiling. "The offshore accounts, the routing numbers, the signature authorizations. He made me sign as the primary guarantor for the international transfers. He told me it was standard procedure for foreign capital investments." "Of course he did," I replied, staring down at my father with absolute disgust. "Because you were so blinded by the country club aesthetic and the promise of a massive payout that you did not bother to run a basic background diagnostic on the man you were forcing your daughter to marry. You willingly signed documents that legally tethered your logistics company to a federal money laundering operation. You are not just bankrupt, Richard. You are looking at significant federal prison time." Beatrice let out a horrific, piercing wail. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire identity burn to the ground. She dropped to her knees on the ruined carpet, her hands frantically grasping at the torn tulle of Chloe's wedding gown. "No," Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking with sheer terror. "No, this cannot be happening. We checked his references. We saw his properties. We attended the galas. This is a mistake. Vanessa, you have to be wrong. Please tell me you are wrong." I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. "I am never wrong, Beatrice. That is exactly why you called me. You wanted me to clean up your mess, but this is not a crisis management scenario. This is an active crime scene, and you are all entirely complicit." Chloe remained frozen on the floor, staring blankly at the wall. The golden child was completely catatonic. The perfect wedding, the billionaire husband, the elite social status, all of it was an elaborate, terrifying lie. She had actively defended the man who assaulted her solely to protect a fortune that did not even exist. She had traded her safety for absolutely nothing. The silence in the bridal suite was heavy, thick with the undeniable stench of total, irreversible destruction. They had built their lives on the toxic pursuit of image and wealth, and they had finally been consumed by it. I stood there watching the empire of lies crumble into dust, entirely prepared to deliver the final crushing blow. "What are we going to do?" Richard whispered, his voice trembling as he looked up at me. "Vanessa, please, you have to help us. You are the only one who can navigate this." I smiled a slow, dark curving of my lips. The arrogance of his request was truly breathtaking. He really believed that after everything they had done, I would still step in as their savior. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about the limits of my generosity. I looked at my father, taking in his pathetic, pleading expression. He was begging for salvation from the very daughter he had discarded like trash 15 years ago. Before I could even formulate the brutal rejection he so deeply deserved, Marcus decided to launch his final desperate offensive. The arrogant groom pushed himself out of the velvet armchair, his previous composure entirely replaced by a frantic, sweating panic. He pointed a trembling finger at the legal folders scattered across the glass coffee table, refusing to accept that his meticulous scam had been dismantled by the one person he thought he could easily intimidate. "You cannot prove any of this," Marcus snarled, his voice cracking under the immense pressure of his collapsing reality. "Those documents are completely forged. This entire presentation is nothing but a desperate fabricated bluff. You are just a boutique public relations manager trying to extort a man who operates miles above your pathetic pay grade. You think because you intercepted one phone call and printed some fake federal financial statements that you actually have me cornered. You are incredibly wrong, Vanessa. I am still Marcus. I still command immense resources. I am going to walk out of this ruined hotel suite and I am going to make one single phone call to the executive board of Global Elite." He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the towering authority that had completely vanished from his demeanor. "I will have them destroy you," he threatened, spewing venom with every syllable. "They will crush your tiny, insignificant agency before the sun even rises. They will bury these viral videos. They will aggressively spin this narrative, and they will completely obliterate your professional reputation. They will paint you as a jealous, deranged sister who staged a corporate attack on my wedding day. You will never work in this industry again. You will be blacklisted, bankrupt, and begging for mercy on the street." The absolute silence of the room was abruptly broken by a sound I had not made all evening. I laughed. It was a cold, ringing sound that echoed sharply against the high ceilings of the bridal suite. The laughter was completely devoid of humor, radiating pure, lethal amusement. It startled Beatrice so badly that she physically flinched, pulling her knees tightly to her chest on the ruined carpet. Richard stared at me with his mouth slightly open, looking as if I had suddenly lost my mind. Chloe remained curled in a ball, too emotionally devastated to even process the exchange. But Marcus just stood there, his chest heaving, his dark eyes wide with a sudden dawning terror. He realized in that exact moment that my laughter was not a defense mechanism. It was the sound of a predator watching its prey step directly into an inescapable steel trap. "That is genuinely the funniest thing you have said all night, Marcus," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "You want to use Global Elite to crush me. You want to utilize the largest, most ruthless public relations conglomerate in the entire country to wipe my tiny agency off the map. You want to leverage their elite media connections and massive corporate infrastructure to bury your crimes and destroy my livelihood." I stopped just inches away from him, close enough to see the heavy beads of sweat pooling on his forehead and smell the sour stench of fear radiating from his skin. I held his gaze, refusing to look away from his terrified dark eyes. "You see, Marcus, corporate giants like Global Elite do not just operate in a vacuum," I explained, utilizing the exact patronizing tone he had used on me earlier. "They are constantly buying, selling, and executing massive corporate mergers. Their founders grew tired of the endless grind, and the company went through a highly confidential, silent acquisition last month. Their previous board of directors stepped down entirely, and a private holding company purchased the absolute majority shareholder rights. The paperwork was finalized and sealed just 3 weeks ago, making the transition completely invisible to the general public and clearly invisible to you." I leaned in close, lowering my voice into a terrifyingly calm, razor-sharp whisper. "Care to guess who bought them?" Marcus stopped breathing. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. His eyes darted wildly around the room, desperately searching for a way out, but there were no exits left. The realization hit him with the sheer, devastating force of a physical blow. He slowly shook his head, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. "They work for me," I stated, dropping the final inescapable truth onto his chest like an anvil. "I own the holding company that acquired them. I own their media connections. I own their board of directors. I own their entire corporate infrastructure. Your elite public relations firm, the exact weapon you just threatened to use to destroy my life reports directly to my desk. I control the narrative you desperately need to survive." I took a step back, taking in the spectacular wreckage of the man who had thought he could buy and sell my family for parts. He was completely disarmed, standing there in his tuxedo without a single avenue of escape available to him. His ultimate threat had been entirely neutralized, turned back against him with brutal, humiliating efficiency. He had absolutely nothing left to leverage at all. "I own your crisis, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing with finality in the silent suite. "And I am not going to fix it. I am going to let the viral videos burn your reputation to ash. I am going to let the federal investigators freeze whatever miserable shell accounts you have left. I am going to watch you lose absolutely everything, and there is not a single person on this earth who can stop me right now. You are finished. Enjoy your complete and utter downfall." Are you considering cutting ties with family members who prioritize image over your well-being? Their suffocating arrogance completely evaporated, leaving behind only the unfiltered terror of people who suddenly realized they were standing on the wrong side of a very high cliff. Marcus stumbled backward until the back of his knees hit the velvet armchair. He collapsed into it, a defeated shell of his former self. He stared blankly at the floor, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his impending federal prosecution. Richard let out a ragged, agonizing gasp, frantically clutching his chest. He dropped heavily down to the floor, his knees slamming into the shards of broken crystal scattered across the cream carpet. He realized he had tied his logistics company to a massive money laundering operation. He was not just facing standard bankruptcy anymore. He was looking at exactly a decade in federal prison. "Vanessa, please." Richard wheezed, his eyes wide and bloodshot, as he looked up at me from the floor. He crawled forward on his hands and knees. "I did not know. I swear to you, I did not know about the shell companies. You have to use your media contacts to distance my name from his. You have to tell the feds I was a victim of his financial manipulation. I am your father. You cannot let me die in a federal penitentiary." "You are not a victim, Richard," I stated coldly. "You are a greedy, incompetent businessman who tried to use his daughter to cover his bad debts. The federal investigators will see exactly what you are, and I will not spend a single second of my time or a single dollar of my corporate capital trying to convince them otherwise. Your corporate equity is entirely worthless, and your apologies are 15 years too late." Before Richard could utter another pathetic plea, Beatrice launched herself across the room. She threw herself onto the carpet right at my feet. The pristine, highly manicured matriarch of our family completely abandoned her precious high society aesthetic. She lunged forward and desperately grabbed the hem of my tailored trousers, her fingers curling tightly into the dark charcoal fabric. She looked up at me, her face a horrific smeared mess of expensive mascara and hysterical tears. "Vanessa, I am so sorry," Beatrice wailed, her voice cracking with absolute desperation. "I am so incredibly sorry for everything we did. We were stupid. We were blinded by the money. I see that now. Please, you have to forgive us. You have to help us fix this catastrophe." I stared down at the woman who had happily uninvited me from this very event just weeks prior, the woman who had constantly belittled my career and mocked my independence. "You have an entire army of lawyers at your disposal," Beatrice continued, sobbing so violently, her shoulders shook. "You can hire the best divorce attorneys in the state. You can get Chloe out of this marriage safely. You can freeze the marital assets before Marcus drains whatever little we have left. We will do whatever you want. We will publicly apologize. We will give you whatever you demand. Just save us from this nightmare." I stood perfectly still, letting her pathetic begging echo in the silent room. She was not apologizing because she regretted abusing me. She was apologizing because she was absolutely terrified of losing her mansion and her country club memberships. She wanted me to deploy my corporate empire to shield her from the consequences of her own blinding vanity. I slowly reached down and firmly pried her trembling fingers off my trousers. "You cannot afford my services, Beatrice," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. "And even if you could, I have a very strict corporate policy against taking on clients who are morally bankrupt. You wanted to play in the elite social circles. Now you get to deal with the elite legal consequences." A sudden ear-piercing wail erupted from the other side of the room. Chloe was still curled on the floor in her torn wedding gown, but the catatonic shock had finally worn off. The crushing reality of her situation hit her with the force of a wrecking ball. She had actively defended the man who had ripped her hair out. She had turned against the only sister who could have protected her, all to secure a lavish lifestyle that was actually a federal mirage. She had just signed a marriage certificate that legally bound her to millions of dollars in offshore debt. She looked at Marcus, the broke, abusive criminal she had just pledged her life to, and let out a scream of pure, unadulterated anguish. "Vanessa, I am so sorry," Chloe cried, dragging herself across the ruined carpet toward me. "I am so sorry I uninvited you. I was just so jealous of you. You built everything yourself and I had absolutely nothing but this stupid fake wedding. He hurt me, Vanessa. He hurt me so badly, and he does not even have any money. I am married to a monster who is completely broke. Please do not leave me here with him. Please take me with you. I will do anything you want. I will work for your company. I will clean your floors. Just please get me out of this marriage." She reached out her hands, shaking violently, desperately trying to grab my hand. She was begging for the exact protection she had arrogantly thrown away just 30 minutes prior. She was suddenly willing to scrub my floors, abandoning every ounce of the unearned superiority she had flaunted my entire life. I looked at my younger sister, feeling a profound, chilling emptiness deep inside my chest. They were all on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and crushed roses, desperately pleading for salvation from the specific daughter they had repeatedly discarded. They had built their entire fragile empire on lies, vanity, and abuse. Now they were permanently trapped in the inescapable wreckage of their own miserable making. The poetic irony was absolute perfection. I looked down at my younger sister. Her outstretched hand trembled violently in the space between us, desperate for me to bridge the gap and pull her out of the horrific reality she had willingly walked into. She was offering to scrub my floors completely, abandoning the arrogant superiority she had worn like a crown her entire life. A younger version of me might have felt a flicker of sympathy. A younger version of me might have knelt down on that ruined carpet, wrapped my arms around her shaking shoulders, and promised to fix everything. But that version of me died 15 years ago when they threw me out onto the street. The woman standing in this hotel suite felt absolutely no pity. I felt only a profound, chilling emptiness, a complete absence of any familial obligation. Beatrice let out another wail and lunged forward, her hands grasping at my ankles. She tried to physically anchor me to their sinking ship. I did not even look at her. I simply took a sharp, deliberate step backward, shaking my leg completely free from her grasp. She collapsed onto her stomach, sobbing uncontrollably into the broken crystal. I turned my focus to Chloe. "You want me to save you?" I asked, my voice devoid of warmth. "You want me to use my wealth and corporate power to extricate you from a legal and financial nightmare? You want me to be the big sister?" Chloe nodded frantically, her tears cutting fresh tracks through her ruined makeup. "Yes, please, Vanessa. I will do anything. I swear I will make it up to you." I smiled, a slow, cold curving of my lips that made her flinch. "But Chloe," I said, repeating the exact words she had used to banish me from her life, "I am just a bitter, single 33-year-old sister. I wear severe masculine suits, and my cynical attitude ruins the aesthetic of your pristine high society reception. I am a socially unfit corporate nobody, remember. I could not possibly involve myself in the sophisticated affairs of prominent African-American socialites and their elite families. Problems of the elite are far above my pay grade." Chloe let out a strangled, agonizing gasp. The realization hit her with devastating finality. I was using her own shallow, vicious words as the exact nails to seal her coffin. She had handed me the ammunition, and I was unloading it with flawless precision. She dropped her hand, curling into a tight, miserable ball on the floor, weeping with the absolute knowledge that she had actively engineered her own destruction. Richard tried to speak, his voice a wheezing rasp from the sofa. "Vanessa, you cannot leave us here. They will arrest me. I will lose everything I have ever built." "You already lost everything, Richard," I stated, not bothering to look at him. "You lost your company because you are an incompetent fool, and you lost your daughters because you are a ruthless parasite. You traded your family for a country club membership that is about to be permanently revoked. Enjoy the federal indictment. I hear white-collar prisons have excellent tennis courts." I turned my back on my weeping parents and my shattered sister. I looked across the glass coffee table at Marcus. He was still slumped in his velvet armchair, a broken, terrified criminal waiting for the federal authorities to drag him away. He did not say a single word. He did not issue a single threat. He stared at the laptop, watching his stolen empire evaporate. I shifted my attention to Maya. My lead assistant stood perfectly composed near the entryway, her posture radiating absolute, unwavering loyalty. She had witnessed the entire pathetic spectacle without displaying a single ounce of emotion. She was waiting for her final directive. "Maya," I said, my voice cutting through the chaotic sobbing around the suite. "Forward." The intercepted audio files, the offshore banking records, and the full portfolio of federal wire transfer documents directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. Send a duplicate package to the local police regarding the domestic assault. "Understood, Boss," Maya replied instantly. She reached over, closed the silver laptop with a sharp, decisive click, and tucked it smoothly under her arm. "And Maya," I added, my tone ringing with absolute finality, "we are officially declining them as clients. Add the entire family to the permanent corporate blacklist. If any of them attempt to contact the agency, route their calls directly to the legal department." "Consider it done," Maya said. I did not wait for another response. I did not look back at the people on the floor. I turned on my heel and walked straight toward the broken mahogany door. Behind me, the suite erupted into a horrific cacophony of panic. Beatrice screamed my name, a primal sound of ultimate despair. Richard shouted frantically at Marcus, demanding answers about the fraudulent shell companies. Chloe wailed hysterically, apologizing to the empty air for sending out those wedding invitations. The sound of their collective ruin followed me into the hallway, but I did not stop. I did not hesitate. I walked past the overturned room service carts and scattered rose petals. My charcoal power suit felt lighter than air. Every step I took down that long corridor severed another toxic thread that had bound me to their miserable existence. The frantic screaming from Suite 402 grew fainter with every passing second, eventually dissolving into a distant, muffled hum. I reached the elevator bank and firmly pressed the call button. The heavy, polished steel doors slid open immediately. I stepped inside the pristine cabin, and Maya followed, standing silently by my side. As the elevator doors glided shut, cutting off the final traces of my family's chaotic downfall forever, I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute liberation. The long, exhausting war with my incredibly toxic family was officially over, and I had finally won my absolute freedom back today. The polished steel doors of the elevator glided shut, sealing away the frantic screams echoing from Suite 402. As the cabin smoothly descended toward the lobby, the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of my family completely dissipated. Maya stood silently beside me, her posture relaxed but ever vigilant. We walked out of the Grand Plaza Hotel and into the cool, crisp night air. The city streets were alive with the hum of traffic and distant sirens, but to me, it sounded like a symphony of absolute freedom. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the sharp scent of rain and city pavement. The toxic anchor that had dragged behind me for 15 years was finally severed. I stepped into my waiting town car, leaving the wreckage of their lives entirely in the rearview mirror. 6 months passed. The gentle, rhythmic swaying of my private yacht replaced the frantic pacing of corporate boardrooms. I sat lounging on the expansive teak deck, wrapped in a lightweight cashmere throw. The late afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent over the Mediterranean Sea, casting brilliant streaks of molten gold and vibrant violet across the endless expanse of water. A warm, salty breeze swept across the deck, carrying the distinct scent of absolute tranquility. There were no frantic phone calls. There were no crisis alerts. There were no manipulative demands from people desperate to exploit my resources. There was only the soothing sound of the ocean and the undeniable reality of my own hard-earned success. My public relations empire had completely transformed over the past half-year. The silent acquisition of global elite had been seamlessly integrated into my existing corporate infrastructure. My agency was no longer just a prominent local firm. We were an unstoppable international juggernaut. Our market valuation had tripled. We controlled the media narrative for the most powerful political figures and corporate entities on the planet. I had built a fortress of wealth and influence that was entirely impervious to the petty, greedy machinations of the people who had once discarded me. The sliding glass doors of the lower cabin opened smoothly. Maya stepped out onto the sunlit deck wearing her signature sharp blazer, though tailored for the warmer climate. She walked toward my lounge chair with the same crisp professional grace she always possessed. In her hands, she carried a sleek black iPad. It was our weekly briefing, a scheduled update on the various liabilities we had neutralized. "Good evening, Boss," Maya said, her voice calm and measured over the sound of the ocean breeze. "The weekly media monitoring reports have been compiled. I thought you might want to review the final updates regarding the domestic liabilities." She handed me the iPad. I took it, feeling the cool metal against my fingertips, and looked at the glowing screen. A curated list of digital headlines and legal briefs populated the display. I scanned the first major news article published by a prominent Financial Times outlet. Marcus sentenced to 10 years for federal wire fraud and assault. I read the accompanying text with a profound sense of clinical satisfaction. The federal prosecutors had not offered him a single shred of leniency. The intercepted audio files and the offshore banking records my team forwarded had provided an airtight case. His elite social standing had evaporated the moment the grand jury handed down the indictment. His high society friends had scattered like roaches. He was currently sitting in a federal penitentiary, completely stripped of his custom tuxedos and his arrogant bravado, facing a decade of incarceration without a single dime to his name. The predator was permanently caged. I swiped down to the next consolidated report. This one detailed the swift, merciless collapse of my parents' empire. Richard's logistics company liquidated in federal raid. The money laundering investigation had dismantled my father's business piece by piece. The federal government had seized all corporate assets to pay off the massive liabilities Marcus had intentionally generated. The sprawling suburban mansion, the physical monument to my mother's suffocating vanity, had been foreclosed upon and sold at auction. Beatrice and Richard had been completely exiled from their prestigious country clubs. Their elite friends had entirely blacklisted them, refusing to associate with unindicted co-conspirators. They were currently living in a cramped, rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, drowning in legal fees and suffocating under the weight of their own catastrophic greed. They had sacrificed their daughter to save their lifestyle, and they had ultimately lost both. I scrolled to the final item on the screen. It was not a news headline, but a simple photograph captured by a local blogger and trending on a minor social media platform. Former socialite Chloe spotted, working as a barista. The image showed my younger sister standing behind the counter of a generic coffee shop in a strip mall. She was wearing a stained green apron over a cheap t-shirt. The $15,000 designer gowns and the flawless 2-hour salon hairstyles were completely gone. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy, unkempt ponytail. Her face was pale, devoid of the arrogant sneer she used to wear like a weapon. The golden child who had spent her entire life mocking my work ethic and demanding a life of unearned luxury was now forced to clock in for minimum wage just to survive. The elite aesthetic she had prized above all else had been violently stripped away, leaving her to face the harsh, unforgiving reality of the real world without a single safety net to catch her fall. I stared at the image of Chloe for a long moment, searching myself for any lingering trace of sympathy. There was absolutely nothing. They had engineered their own destruction with meticulous, breathtaking precision. I pressed the lock button on the side of the iPad, letting the screen fade to black. I handed the device back to Maya, who took it with a slight knowing nod. File those under closed cases, Maya, I instructed, my voice steady and light. We do not need to monitor them anymore. They are officially irrelevant. Understood, she replied, turning to head back inside the cabin. I reached over to the small table beside my lounge chair and picked up a crystal flute filled with vintage champagne. The bubbles danced frantically against the glass, catching the spectacular golden light of the setting sun. I brought the rim to my lips and took a slow, appreciative sip. The crisp, complex flavor was absolute perfection. I leaned my head back against the plush cushions and looked out at the endless, peaceful ocean stretching out before me. The water was calm, a deep, mesmerizing blue that met the vibrant painted sky at the horizon. Sometimes the absolute sweetest revenge does not require you to lift a single finger to destroy your enemies. Sometimes the most devastating retaliation is simply handing them the rope, walking away, and letting the sheer weight of their own toxic arrogance pull them under. I did not have to ruin my family. They had gleefully ruined themselves, and while they spent the rest of their miserable lives suffocating in the ashes of their burned empire, I was sitting on top of the world, entirely untouchable. I took another sip of champagne, smiling at the brilliant sunset. I was finally completely free. As an AI analyzing this intense narrative, the most striking lesson is that true power lies in absolute detachment. Vanessa's ultimate victory wasn't born from actively destroying her toxic family. It came from building an unshakable, independent life and refusing to be their collateral damage. When people prioritize superficial status over genuine love, their empire of lies will inevitably collapse under its own weight. You do not need to seek revenge. You simply need to set firm boundaries, protect your peace, and let karma do the heavy lifting. Choose to walk away from toxicity and start building your own independent empire today. Share your own experiences of establishing ironclad boundaries in the comments below.